Chapter 19. Medieval Philosophy and Theosophy. Wisdom and man is nobody's servant. Modern materialistic philosophy is a system of theoretical speculation based upon reasoning from the known to the unknown, drawing illogical deductions from accepted material opinions. But true theosophy is the possession of knowledge obtained by practical experience. To be a true philosopher, it is necessary to have acute reasoning powers and to calculate possibilities. To be a true theosophist, it is necessary to have the power of spiritual perception and to know the things perceived, irrespective of any possibilities, probabilities, or accepted opinions. A speculative philosopher occupies an objective or material standpoint in regard to the things which he examines. The theosophist finds the character of that thing in himself. There is nothing in the macrocosm of nature that is not contained in man, because man and nature are essentially one, and a man who is conscious of being one with nature will know everything in nature if he knows only himself. A philosopher, having no knowledge of self, can only speculate about things which he does not see. A practical theosophist, knowing his own self, does not need to speculate, because he knows what he sees, and he sees what he knows. There is a true and a false philosophy. As the froth in new-made wine swims upon the top and hides the true wine below, so there is a froth of sophistry and pseudo-philosophy swimming at the top of true philosophy. It looks like knowledge, but it is the outcome of ignorance, gilded and varnished to deceive the vulgar materialist. So in a way, you could say I'm a theosophist because I combine the objective and the subjective. And I actually do philosophy rather than quote philosophers. And call it philosophy just because I can quote something. Because, that looks like knowledge, but it is like a parasite growing upon the tree of knowledge, drawing the sap out of the true tree and converting it into poison. The intellectual working of the brain alone is not sufficient to give birth to a physician. The true physician is not he who has merely heard of the truth, but he who feels the truth, he who sees it before him as clearly as the light of the sun, he who hears it as he would hear the noise of the cataract of Niagara, or the roar of the storm upon the ocean, who seeks it and tastes it, it being sweet to him, or bitter as gall. Nature produces diseases and effects of their cures, and where, then, could be found a better teacher than nature herself? That alone which we see and feel and perceive constitutes true knowledge, not that of which we are merely informed in books, and which is not confirmed by experience. The knowledge of nature as it is, not as it is imagined to be, constitutes true philosophy. He who merely sees the external appearance of things is not a philosopher. The true philosopher sees the reality, not merely the appearance. And Sophia, of course, relates to the term philosophy, because philosophy is the lover of wisdom. And it's interesting that since Baphomet is said to mean baptism of wisdom, you have actually slices of the brain that kind of resemble parts of the Baphomet image. And you can relate it to the 1,000 goat mother and other queen of heaven, but a queen of heaven who teaches sorts of things. And anyway, so these myths connect to each other in different ways, but that doesn't mean there's not real spiritual beings out there. They just don't necessarily have the roles that we think they do. Like, sure, they can be evolved in these subjects, but they're not necessarily like the god of this or the god of that, right? He who knows the sun and the moon has a sun and moon in him, and he can tell how they look even if his eyes are shut. Likewise, the true physician sees in himself the whole constitution of the microcosm of man with all its parts. And the Magical Egypt series is, they're not the only ones that address this thing of how the parts of your body are actually related to, particularly in Egypt, in the statues and the image, the type of animals and images that they use. He sees the constitution of his patient as if the latter was a clear crystal in which not even a single hair could escape detection. He sees him as he sees the stones and pebbles at the bottom of a clear well. This is the philosophy upon which the true art of medicine is based. Not that your physical eyes are able to show you these things, but it is nature herself who teaches it to you. Nature is the universal mother of all. And if you are in harmony with her, if the mirror of your mind has not been made blind by the cobwebs of speculations, erroneous theories, and misconceptions, she will hold up before you a mirror in which you will see the truth. Now, just because people use gender language in terms of nature itself, the physical nature itself doesn't mean that, there's really male or female parts of the physical nature, unless you're talking like about the animals, But he who is not true himself will not see the truth as it is taught by nature. It is far easier to study a number of books and to learn by heart a number of scientific theories than to ennoble one's own character to such an extent as to enter into perfect harmony with the truth. No one can, therefore, be called a theosophist who does not possess the knowledge of his own divine self, which enables man to know all things as only an adept knows them. And this power is in possession of no man, but belongs to the soul in man. Only when man has found his soul power can he partake of divine wisdom. Man is a mixed being. He is the center of focus in which the three kingdoms, i.e. the three forms of manifestation of the primordial will, the world of darkness or fire, the world of spiritual light, and that of external nature are active and in man, which the powers of either of these three kingdoms may become conscious and manifest. If he is a temple of the spirit power, his soul will reveal wisdom to him. If he is a dwelling of evil, this evil will become personified in him. If the world of mind, intellect, emotion, etc. is reflected within his soul, and his mind becomes absorbed by it, he will become a spiritual adept. It is most true and certain that if there were no natural world, nature could not become manifested in man, and it is equally true that if there were no supreme good or evil in the universe, neither good nor evil could become revealed or personified in a man. And if we understand the term Nabi in the Semitic languages, an avatar, aside from doctrines of like this is really like a god or something like that, because that's not really what the term means. Then we would get this, that it's what we're choosing to personify, what we've been given the opportunity to personify. Seed, when properly planted, has the power to attract into itself the sunlight which requires it to enable it to grow. And, in the same sense, there is no man who has the power to attract spirit and occult powers into himself, and to unite with that which is divine in him only by his own will and faith. Only like acts upon like. The natural astral principles in man are acted upon by the corresponding powers in nature. The growth of plants is due to the power of the sun being active in them, and the spiritual unfoldment of the soul of man is also due to the power of the astral sight. The knowledge of man in regard to a truth, however learned and intellectual he may be, can be nothing else but an opinion to one who does not recognize the same truth in himself. That's where the whole namaste thing comes from. If we believe or accept the doctrine of another man who perceives the truth, it does not follow that we recognize that truth as our own. It is simply that we consider his opinion worthy of our belief. Well, contradictory things can't be true, but there are personal inflections of, how one person may say things or live things. A knowledge of the opinions of others may guide us in our researches, as long as we cannot find the truth in ourselves. But such a knowledge is as liable to mislead us as to lead us right. The only key to arrive at the recognition and understanding of the truth is the perception and understanding itself. Opinions change, and creeds and beliefs change accordingly. But the knowledge which we find in our own soul stands as firm as a rock. Theoretical Theosophy. There is no such a thing as theoretical Theosophy, because divine wisdom is not a matter of theory, but the divine knowledge of self. To know a thing, we must see it and feel it and be identified with it ourselves. Things that transcend the power of physical sight can only be known if they are experienced and felt by the soul, are seen by the inner or spiritual sight. People see or know about the signs that they claim they're going to need spiritually to believe correctly, or however you're going to phrase that. But they don't, because they only materially perceive and conclude. Love or hate, reason or conscience, are unknown things to those who do not realize their existence. The attributes of the spirit are not only beyond the power of intellectual comprehension, they can only be known to the spirit itself, and they are called occult because they cannot be understood without the possession of the light of the spirit. In Christianity, it's typically a doctrine that, if there's contradictions and all that other stuff, it's just because you're not possessed with the Holy Ghost strong enough. Like that's going to make lies and contradictions and ethical issues not exist. I don't find that. Man has two kinds of reason, spiritual and animal reason. The former is eternal and is of the soul and remains with it. The latter originates from the mind. No animal product can be victorious over death. Death kills that which is animal, but not that which is eternal. A man who is not a man, as far as wisdom in him is concerned, is not a man, but an animal in human shape. Well, physically humans are a type of animal, so. But some people take issues, like, I can't accept that religion because it says that people are animals. It's like, scientifically, yeah. And second of all, the word means any creation that's physically incarnate. So, that refers to humans too, To be able to understand good, it is necessary that man should experience evil. Without the knowledge of darkness, the true nature of light could not be known. But no amount of evil experience could enable a man to know that which is good and divine if he is not in possession of the true understanding which endows him with the power to profit by his experience, and which is not of his own making, but given to him as a gift by wisdom itself. The wise man rules the stars in him, but the animal man is ruled by the stars which force him to do as he is directed by his animal nature. He who has escaped the gallows once will repeat his crimes, for he thinks that having escaped his punishment once, he will escape it again. Such a person is blown about as a reed and cannot resist the forces which are acting upon him, and the reason of this is that he has no self-knowledge and does not know that there is in him a power superior to that of the stars. Wisdom in man is nobody's servant, and has not lost its own freedom, and through wisdom man attains power to see clairvoyantly and heal disease. Intellectual reasoning may arrive at the door of the spiritual temple, but man cannot enter without perceiving that the temple exists and that he has the power to enter. This knowledge is obtained by faith, but faith does not come to those who do not desire it, and a desire for divine wisdom is not created without faith. Man's desire depends on the presence of an existing cause, and that which attracts him strongest is the thing for which he has the greatest desire. It is not within the power of the animal or intellectual nature of man to desire or to love that which he does not know. He may have a curiosity to learn the unknown mysteries, but he can love with all his heart only that which attracts him, that which he feels, and that which he knows exists. He must realize the presence of the highest in his own soul before he can know it with his intellect. The spiritual temple is locked with many keys, and those who are vain enough to believe that they can invade it by their own power and without being shown the way by the light of wisdom will storm against it in vain. Wisdom is not created by man. It must come to him and cannot be purchased for money or coaxed with promises, but it comes to those whose minds are pure and whose souls are open to receive it. It is said that those who wish to become wise must be like children, but there are few amongst the learned who would be willing to undertake such a feat. There are few who would be able to realize the fact, even if they were willing to do so, that they themselves are without life, without knowledge, without power, and that all life and consciousness, knowledge, and power comes from the universal fountain of all, of which they are merely imperfect instruments for its manifestation. There are few amongst the learned who would be willing to give up their illusory dependence of thought, their accepted opinion, their dogmatic speculations about possibilities and probabilities, and to submit their own personal will entirely to the will of the wisdom of spiritual truth, and thus to render their souls fit places for the residence of true faith. Humanity resembles a field of wheat, in which each individual represents a plant, attempting to grow higher than the others and to bear more abundant fruit. But there are few who desire to be nothing themselves, so that spiritual forces may act through them and be all in and through them. The object of man's existence is to become perfectly happy, and the shortest way to become so is to be perfect and happy now, and wait for a possibility to become so in a future state of existence. All may be happy, but only the highest happiness is enduring, and permanent happiness can be obtained only by attaining permanent good. The highest a man can feel and think is his highest ideal, and the higher we rise in the scale of existence, and the more our knowledge expands, the higher will be our ideal. As long as we can cling to our highest ideal, we can be happy in spite of the sufferings and vicissitudes of life. The highest ideal confers the highest and most enduring happiness, and the whole of Theosophy consists in the recognition of the highest ideal and a constant adhesion to it, which cannot be loosened by the illusions of the senses, nor weakened by doubts which an imperfectly developed and short-sighted intellect attempts to create, but which may be strengthened by constant regard for the truth and an unwavering attention to duty. Spiritual or occult is the greatest power in the universe because it is the source and sum of all powers. In their highest mode of manifestation, spirit is therefore absolute consciousness, absolute truth, and absolute wisdom. Well, what about lying spirits? Huh? But, spirit isn't the spirit, God, Okay. If we wish to accomplish anything great, the first requirement is the presence of spirit power, because it is a man's understanding and power that resides in man. But these hidden forces cannot be approached by an intellect that is without spiritual light. We cannot know the principle of occult force unless we feel it with our own soul, and the more we desire it, the more we will be able to comprehend with the soul what this principle is. Occult power is therefore a power transcending the lower nature of man. It cannot develop itself out of the animal elements of man, but it is a gift from the universal fountain of truth, in the same sense as sunshine cannot grow out of the earth, but comes from above. Spirit power exists in the souls of men. The intellect is the greatest possession of mortal man, and an intellect that rises to the source of all knowledge by the power of faith may know all the mysteries of nature and become godlike itself. But an intellect without faith leads into error, grovels in darkness, and goes into perdition. An intellect combined with love for the supreme good leads to wisdom. An intellect without wisdom leads to the powers of evil. As long as anyone fancies his highest ideal to exist outside of him, somewhere above the clouds or in the history of the past, he will go outside of himself to seek for it in his fancy or in the pages of history. This is not occultism, but merely dreaming about it, for not that wisdom which exists outside of man, but that which has taken root in him renders him wise. A child is not born from outside of its mother's womb, but from within. And the spiritual regeneration of man must be accomplished by that which is existing in him. The spiritual regeneration of man requires the opening of his inner senses, and this again involves the development of the internal organs. Physical process, but productive of the great changes in the physical body. He who rejects, neglects, or despises his physical body, as long as he has not outgrown the necessity of having such a corporeal form, may be compared to the yolk in an egg, wanting to be free from the white of an egg and the shell, without having grown into a bird. Occult philosophy means love of wisdom, and the lover of wisdom is a seeker for knowledge. He desires to know the secrets of nature and the mysteries of spirit life, which may be found at the very foundation of his own soul. Occultism means the wisdom of truth, in other words, the self-realization of God in the soul of man. It is not man, but the God in man who knows his own divine self, and is therefore not resting with the will and pleasure of man to become a disciple, but this depends on the awakening of the Spirit in him. It does not rest with the, well, your will is controlled by your spirit, though, so if you surrender your will, that's part of the symbolism behind the whole Agni and Soma bit. You give of your consciousness through your will to Indra, the god of heaven. Now, there's personifications and stuff like that, and I'm not saying that that's, not a present thing. But yeah, a lot of these deity names that we think are like some elephant or whatever it's not limited to that. It's not saying that divinity is limited in that way. Some myths do, but it is Materialism argues and deducts, speculates, makes additions and multiplications, and by logical reasonings seeks to prove that for such are such reasons, this or that cannot otherwise than so or so be. But true wisdom requires no arguments, no logic or reasoning, because it is already the self-knowledge of the one from whom all other things are deriving their origin. Well, negating things that I can't prove that it's otherwise, so therefore it can't be otherwise. It's not logical, right? It is the highest and most exalted kind of rationalism, for there can be nothing more rational than to know the divine fountain of all and to become all-powerful. All numbers are multiples of one. All sciences converge into a common point. All wisdom comes out of one center, and the number of wisdom is one. The light of wisdom radiates into the world and manifests itself in various ways according to the substances in which it manifests itself. Therefore, man may manifest reason in a threefold manner: as instinct, as animal reason, and spiritual intelligence. The knowledge which the soul derives from the physical and animal elements is temporal. That which it derives from the spirit is eternal. Spirit is the father of wisdom, and all wisdom is derived from it. You may grow into knowledge, but you cannot grow knowledge yourself, because in you is nothing but what can be deposited there by your spirit. Those who believe that they can learn anything without the assistance of spiritual understanding will fall into idolatry, superstition, and error. But those who love the luminous center will be attracted to it, and their knowledge comes from the soul. Spirit is the father of wisdom, and man is the son. So see that we're understanding the father and son thing. If you wish for knowledge, you must apply for it to the father, and not to the son. And if the son desires to teach wisdom, he must teach that wisdom which he derived from the father. In the Bible, it says that Jesus did not have his own power, didn't have his own doctrine, but he was using the one of whom sent him, just like Moses and the others, to perform the same types of miracles, right? The knowledge which our clergymen possess is not obtained by them from the Father, but they learn it from each other. You know, the apostolic method, right? They are not certain of the truth of what they teach, and therefore they use argumentation, circumvention, and prevarication. They fall into error and vanity, and mistake their own opinions for the wisdom of truth. Hypocrisy is not holiness. Conceit is not power. Slyness is not wisdom. The art of deceiving and disputing, sophisticating, perverting, and misrepresenting truths may be learned in schools, but the power to recognize and to follow the truth cannot be conferred by academical degrees. It comes only from the soul. He who desires to know the truth must be able to see it, and not to be satisfied with descriptions of it received from others, but be true to himself. The highest power of the intellect, if it is not illumined by the spiritual understanding, is only a high grade of animal intellect, and will perish in time. But the intellect animated by the love of the Supreme is the intellect of the Spirit, and will live in eternity. One of the things that I try to do when I share my visions is to try to, give it the context of the methods that were used. Now, the methods are used all the time, and the visions are relatively rare in that comparison, but the practices, the feeling and the soul satisfaction, that comes, and then some of the other stuff comes in other than that. So yeah, just not recounting accounts for people to believe in or not believe in, right? All things are vehicles of virtues. Everything in nature is a house wherein dwell certain powers and virtues, such as has been infused throughout nature, and which inhabits all things in the same sense as the soul is in man. But the soul is a creature originating in the spirit, and at death goes to spirit life. Natural man is a son of nature, and ought to know nature, his mother. But the soul, being a son of the universal spirit, ought to know the Father, the creator of all. In regard to the true and false faith, it is not a faith in the existence of a historical Jesus Christ that has the power to save mankind from evil, but a faith in the supreme power of the soul, God, through which the man, Jesus, was enabled to act. The former faith is merely a belief and a result of education. The latter is a faith belonging to the constitution of man. Christ does not say that if we believe in his personal power to accomplish wonderful things, we would be enabled to overthrow mountains, but he spoke of our own faith, meaning the spiritual power in man that may act through ourselves as much as it acted through Christ, if we become like him. This power comes from the soul. If one man curse another in the name of Christ, he curses him by the power of his soul, and by his own faith. That power becomes active in and through him by his faith, and not of the gratitude for his professed belief, or the belief of the man he has cursed. That Christ once existed upon the earth, the power of the true faith extends as far as the power of the soul. Man can accomplish nothing by his own power, but everything may be accomplished through man by the power of faith. If you did not have faith in your ability to walk, you would not be able to walk. If you accomplish anything, whatever, faith accomplishes it through you. Faith does not come from man, and man cannot create faith. The faith is a power coming from his soul. Its germ is laid within man, and may be cultivated or neglected by him. It may be used by him for good or for evil, but it only acts effectively when it is strong and pure. He who wants to employ it must have only one object in view. Diseases may be caused and cured by faith realization, and if men knew the power of faith, they would have more faith and less superstition. The subject of the psychology of faith and doubt is most fully treated in chapter 24 of Master Key by Lauron William de Laurence. You have no right to call a disease incurable. You have only the right to say that you cannot cure it. A man who trusts only in his own science will accomplish little, but he who has faith in the power of the healing power of nature, acting through his soul, and who employs that power intelligently, will accomplish much. In the Islamic world, they are taught that Muhammad said that every disease has a cure. It doesn't mean that everybody will have access to those cures. It's just, if anyone thinks that he can cure a disease or accomplish anything else, merely because he believes that he is able to accomplish it, he believes in the superstition. But if he believes that he can perform such a thing because he is conscious of having the power to do so within his soul, he will then be able to accomplish it by the power of true faith. Such faith is knowledge and gives power. True faith is spiritual consciousness, but a belief based upon mere opinions and creeds is the product of ignorance and is superstition. Now, you can have opinions, because you judge constantly, right? And some of them can form creeds. But it can't be just merely, my opinion. I think this, and all this is like, well, why do you think this? This is the curse of all dabblers in the divine and occult mysteries, that when they began to believe that there is something superior to the merely animal man, this belief opens the door for superstition and idolatry. For having no knowledge of the power of the divine will, God, within their own self, they are devoid of the true faith, which is divine self-confidence. They therefore put their trust not in the one true spirit power within their own soul, but in the so-called gods, which they have created within their own imagination. You can say perhaps polytheism and gendering of divinity is related to psychological issues. The Quran touches on that. Sigmund Freud touches on that. Freud's a bit rude and disrespectful at times, but they seek in outward things for that which they cannot find within their own empty shells. They neglect their duties as men and reveal in dreams wherein there is nothing real. Some put their faith in doctors and priests, and others in herbs and roots, still others in magic spells and incantations. But the wise know that the first step on the road to spiritual unfoldment is the fulfillment of one's duty as a man. For no god can grow out of a man unless that man has become truly developed as he ought to be. In this fulfillment of one's duty and becoming true to one's nature, as in man, rests the germ of happiness, and from this germ is evolved the regenerated man in whom wisdom exists and who lives through eternity. And we can find also, if we have faith in divinity, then the whole universe is a means. We don't necessarily know for what, but we can live in that consciousness that the whole universe is a means. And we have choices within those means, and those choices can align to benefit us in various ways. The body which you receive from your parents, and which is built up from the nutriments it draws directly and indirectly from the universe, has no spiritual powers, for wisdom and virtue, faith, hope, and charity do not grow from material things. They are not the products of man's physical organization, but the attributes of an invisible body, the soul, whose germs are laid within man. The physical body changes and dies, the soul is eternal. The eternal man is the real man, and is not generated by his earthly parents. He does not draw nutriment from the earth, but from the eternal, invisible source, God, from which he originated. Nevertheless, the two bodies are one. And man may be compared to a tree drawing his nutriment from the earth and from the surrounding air. The roots extend into the earth and seek their nutriment in the dark, but the leaves receive their nutriment from the light. The temporal body is the house of the eternal, and you should therefore take care of it, because he who destroys the temporary body destroys the house of the eternal. And although the eternal man is invisible to those who have not developed spiritual sight, he exists nevertheless, and will become visible in time, just as a child in its mother's womb is invisible before it is born, that after its birth it may be seen by all but those who are blind, and as everything returns after a while to the source from whence it came, so the physical body returns to the earth, and the soul to spirit life. Some children are born from heaven, good parents, and others are born from hell, evil parents. Because each human spirit has his inherent tendencies, and those tendencies belong to his spirit and indicate the state in which he existed before he was born. Well, we aren't destined for heaven or hell because of what happened before our birth, but because of the choices it was known we would make even before we were born. And certainly the child stage of development is actually representative of puberty. And that's where we, don't be some rebel without a cause or some nonsense like that. But, it's your choice what to develop, what to act out, what to set aside. Witches and sorcerers are not made at once. They are born with powers for evil. They are born with the tendencies which they acquired in former lives upon the earth, or upon some other planet. Well, perhaps the beings that come with them have acquired, the beings that they have pacts with have acquired these things over time. The body is only an instrument. If you seek for man in his dead body, you are seeking for him in vain. But this physical body, which is believed to be of no little importance by those who love to dream about the mysteries of spirit, is the most secret and valuable thing. It is the true stone which the builders rejected, but which must become the cornerstone of the temple. Well, and we can look at Mecca and the talk about it being taken away from the Israelites and given to the Ishmaelites. So we can, if we know from the Talmud or otherwise that that was Western Arabia, that Abraham had a temple over there. It is the stone which is considered worthless by those who seek for a God above the clouds and reject him when he enters their house. Well, the stone, the dot or whatever in a square or a cube or the lump or in that arrangement, that's the true self in the psychological diagram. And by knowing your true self, then you know your Lord. Not saying that you're God or whatever, but this physical body is not merely an instrument for divine power, but it is also the soil from which that which is immortal in man receives its strength. A seed requires the power of the sunshine to enable it to take from the earth the elements necessary for its growth, and the spirit. And in the same sense, the spiritual body of man receiving its nutriment from the spirit could not unfold and develop if it were not for the presence of the physical body in man with its elementary and elemental forces. For the physical body is comparable to the wood from which is produced the fire which gives light. There would be no light if there were nothing to burn. The more there is wood to burn, the greater will be the combustion. And thus it is with the lapis philosophorum, or balsama perpetuo in corpore humano. But it is not proper to say that a great deal about the lapis philosophorum, or to boast about its possession. The masters sufficiently indicated the way for its preparation to those who are not devoid of the true understanding, but they have spoken in parables, so that unworthy persons may not know the secret and misuse it. Look at a man. He is not a perfect being, but only half a man, as long as he has not been made into one with the woman. Man and woman are both one in the Lord, Spirit, and having become one with the woman, then will he be not a half, but a whole. Well, we're whole in ourselves, but we understand that males and females have certain general and specific superiorities and inferiorities when you compare to each other. So this idea we're all the same and, everybody gets, everybody does the same work, same wage per se, but not necessarily everybody gets the same wage and same everything else. It just doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make sense to force equity when you have equality in other ways, Certainly wives and mothers would have different rights than fathers and husbands and, those occasions. But, well, I mean, in some instances, but overall, it equals out overall, The true spiritual church, the rock upon which the true spiritual church is founded, is not to be found in Rome, nor in the realm of fancy, but in the power of faith. It is the word of wisdom from which you should learn, and that word you will find neither statuary nor paintings, but only universal spirit, God. If faith is preached to you, it is done for the purposes of implanting it into your heart, where it may take root and become manifest to you. But if your faith is not in your soul, but in forms and ceremonies, and if you cling to these forms, you may know that your soul has no true spiritual understanding, because although the forms and the ceremonies may cause you to weep and to sigh, this Sighing and weeping is worthless, because your sentiment comes from those images, and to those images will it return. All things return finally to the place from whence they took their origin, and, as these things are perishable, the sentiments which they excite will perish with them. The true soul desires faith in itself, without ceremonies. If you do not require the ceremonies, they will be useless in matters of faith as well as in the art of magic. Now, see, that's how they lead you away from the thing. They say, oh, well, the higher station doesn't require us. No. The love of the servant master is perfected in the person who has perfected the friend of God stage, or having your friends for the sake of God, or reacting with your friends according to God's principles, or whatever. And the parent-child, the spouse, and the socially inappropriate. You just can't jump to the socially inappropriate. It's like, oh, yep, but you understand, like the Quran says, every nation had its sacrifices and its ceremonies, and sometimes had some rules for a time or place. It's not in the direction. It's in your obedience to God. It's in your consciousness and that sort of stuff. But I do not say that images should be made and that the suffering of Christ should not be represented in pictures. Such things are good to move the mind of man to the practice of piety, virtue, and veneration. And of those who are unable to read, they are very useful and better than many a sermon. See, the tarot, from the biblical word tra, gate or something like that, is not to be graven images, but to be didactic teaching things, to display themes before you. When you start thinking on that father card, that guy sitting with crossed legs, that's God, right? And the hanged man, that's like Jesus. And start doing that you actually think that this is what God looks like and stuff, then you're running into problems. I'm not speaking against the use of a thing, but against its misuse. Well, the misuse is better than being completely atheistic. I will argue that point. Such things are useful if we know their true meaning and understand their effects. Well, generally, their misuse is better than nothing. The saints, good spirits, are in spirit life, and not in the wood out of which an image is carved. Each man is himself nearest to his own deity, or what he considers to be his deity, or how he considers deity. I contradict your old fathers because they wrote for the body and not the soul. They wrote poetry, but not spiritual truths. They spoke flatteries instead of telling the truth. They were teachers of fashions and usages, not teachers of eternal life. Well, a myth is something with use and meaning, so it's not the same thing as fable. It's not the same thing as fables, closer to that sort of thing they're talking about here. They were teachers of fashions. The mere imitation of the personal usages of the saints leads to nothing but damnation. The wearing of a black coat or the possession of a piece of paper signed by some human authority does not make a man divine. Those are divine who act wisely, because wisdom is God. So if you're surrendered to God, then God's doesn't have the laws of nature working against you. And so you can say it's divine in that sense, A clergyman should be a spiritual guide for others. But how can a man be a spiritual guide if he merely talks about spiritual things and knows himself nothing about it? It may be said that the personal behavior of a clergyman does not affect the truth of what he teaches. But a clergyman who does not act rightly does not possess the truth, and can therefore not teach it. He can only parrot-like repeat words and sentences, and their meaning will be incomprehensible to his hearers, because he knows nothing about that meaning himself. Belief in opinions is not faith. He who foolishly believes is foolish. A fool who believes unreasonable things is dead in faith, because he has no knowledge, and without knowledge there can be no faith. He who wants to obtain true faith must know, because faith grows out of spiritual knowledge. The faith that comes from that knowledge is rooted in the soul. He who ignorantly believes has no knowledge, and possesses no faith and no power. Nature does not desire that we should remain in darkness and ignorance. On the contrary, our knowledge should be of self. We should be the recipients of divine wisdom. Nature did not intend men and women to be fools, blockheads, and simpletons, who are ready to believe anything, no matter how absurd it may be. Neither did it intend that one only wise and learned man should be in each country, and that other people should follow him blindly, as the sheep follow a ram. But we should all have our knowledge in our soul, and take it out of the universal fountain of wisdom. We should know the power of our soul, but we can learn to know this only by becoming wise. The power of the soul will become manifest to us through wisdom. The love for truth will be kindled in our hearts by ardent love for humanity. And a love for humanity will be caused by a love for truth. Thus, the God of the macrocosm and the God of the microcosm act upon each other. Well, they're the same deity. There doesn't have to be a deity for every emotion and everything else, but and both are one, for there's only one God, and this God is self, through which wisdom becomes manifest. Well, depends on what word we're using for self. Is there the big self and the little self? So the little selves are the creations, and the big self is the creator of the selves, and it's a complex thing to go in elsewhere, and I'm sure there's better sources to talk about it. There is an earthly sun, which is the cause of all heat, and all who are able to see may see the sun, and those who are blind cannot see the sun, but feel its heat. There is an eternal sun, which is the source of all wisdom. We're spelling it with a U. And those who are spiritual, their spiritual senses have awakened to life and will see that sun and be conscious of its existence. But those who have not attained spiritual development may yet feel its power by an inner faculty, which is called intuition. In Ekankar, they talk about Sugmod. Sugmod is like some sphere, some fuzzy blue sphere like a sun out there or something. Animal reason is active in the animal soul, and wisdom in the spiritual soul. The church cannot produce a sage, neither can it furnish a natural form for a sage. Christians are not perfect, for many produce cripples and diseases, abnormalities and monstrosities, the blind and the lame. But that which comes from a soul which has grown wise is perfect. Wisdom is a germ which is planted into the soul of man, and man is the gardener and cultivator, whose business it is to surround it with the elements necessary for its growth, so that when the earthly tabernacle is broken, the spirit may return to spirit life, having grown in knowledge, being clothed in faith in itself, God, and illumined by wisdom. Now, some of these doctrines are things that happen when things get lost in translation. The difference between the divine self and your self, right? The wisdom of life is not made of pieces, but is only one. While we are on this earth, we ought to keep our faith in self, God, so as to be in every respect as a child is like its father. Thus, we ought to be made out of the whole cloth, and not to be patched up. That's why the Sufis meditate on qualities of God, whether they use list of 99, or whether they use the whole 319 from the tradition, or the wise man in God has the wisdom of God, self, and will be taught in a way that nobody can contradict or resist him, and his teaching will harm no one, but bring joy and gladness and glory to all who will receive it. Spirit passes into the body and out of it, like a breath of air passing through the strings of an Aeolian harp. If we succeed in binding it there, we will create a source of undying harmony, to create an immortal being. But to bind spirit, we must be able to bind thought. Man is a materialized thought. He is what he thinks. To change his nature from the mortal to the immortal state, he must cease to hold fast in his mode of thinking. He must cease to hold fast his thoughts, that which is illusory and perishing, and hold on to that which is eternal. The visible universe is thought of the eternal mind, thrown into objectivity by its will, and crystallized into matter by its power. Look at the everlasting stars, look at the indestructible mountain peaks. They are the thoughts of the universal mind, and they will remain as long as the thoughts of that mind do not change. If you could hold on to a thought, you would be able to create, but who but the enlightened can hold on to a thought? Are not the illusions of the senses continually destroying that which you attempt to create? Men do not think what they choose, but that which comes into their mind. If they could control the action of their minds, they would be able to control their own nature and the nature by which their forms are surrounded. The Master Key, 416 pages, teaches scientific concentration, thought, control, and mental discipline. This is the author's latest work and may be obtained of the Laurence Company. And I've never seen any other books by him anywhere except this one that was given to me. So, but perhaps online we can find it if we want to share it at another time. But mortal man has no power to control his thoughts. I'm thinking of sharing James George Fraser's The Golden Bough. So that's going to take some time, right? But mortal man has no power to control his thoughts unless that power has been developed by mental discipline. Mortals are not from heaven, but on the earth. They did not drop down from heaven, but grew upon the earth, and the visible powers are moving in them. But if they are reborn in the spirit, then they will move in soul powers. What is this aid, these powers of which I am writing, but soul powers? Who gives and distributes them but the great universal spirit, God alone? He who trusts in his own power will fail and become a victim of his own vanity. He who expects salvation from others will be disappointed. There is no God, no saint, and no man in whom we can put any confidence, faith, or trust for the purpose of our salvation, except the power of the divine principle acting within ourselves. Only when man realizes the presence of God in his own soul will he begin his infinite life and step from the realm of evanescent illusions into that of permanent truth. Now, the Muslimin, one of their chapters that they are recommended to say on a Friday is chapter 50. And it mentions that God is closer than our jugular vein. So closer than the vital artery is God. So God's closer than this material realm is, because our real self it inhabits the material realm, but it's not it.